Welcome in, everyone. We're so excited to have you. We'll get started in just a couple minutes as folks trickle in. And we're gonna prompt a couple of polls to kick things off. So you should see a poll coming up soon as it is, there it is. So we encourage you to fill this out and we'll share the results in a minute or two. Also feel free to throw in any questions in the chat. We're definitely monitoring that and we'll respond in real time if we can, or in the end during the Q&A. And Christina, you just let me know if you want me to kick things off now or if you want me to wait one more minute.
We'll wait one more minute to get as many responses, so at 2:06 Eastern.
Sounds good. An awesome job with the poll. We're at almost 60% participation, so people are ready to dive in, which is great. Cool. Awesome. Just broke 70%. Cool. So as those poll results are coming in, we're actually sharing the results now. It looks like everyone is thrilled to be here, which is great. And just kind of shared a little bit about biggest business challenges right now, which I think genuinely all of these topics are things that we're going to touch on in this panel. So thanks so much for your contributions. A quick intro. We're so excited to have you all here to engage in this really important discussion about working parents and ways to support them. There are actually 50 million working parents in the US who have a kid under the age of 14. I don't know why the break is 14. I think kids under any age are the same, or all count. So we all know that we're working with a lot of parents in our teams and on our companies. And so it's important to figure out how to support them. Especially today, there are so many things that we are all dealing with in this environment that we've seen that companies who support working parents generally have better working cultures and they're able to support other employees as well. We are really excited to have Brittany Barrett here from Kinside. Kinside is a parenting benefit who is serving thousands of working parents across the country today. And they've actually realized that there's a 93% increased likelihood of parents staying with a company when parenting benefits are provided. Lastly, I just want to recognize that this panel is sort of put on and supported by AllVoices and Electives. AllVoices is an employee intelligence platform that systematically asks for, analyzes, and helps companies to act on feedback of all kinds. We really believe that when employees are heard, you will reduce turnover, reduce your recruiting costs, and be able to actually have a company that reflects the values of the people working there. And lastly, just a shout out to Electives. We are a learning and development platform that create live learning experiences for teams that they love from teachers they'll never forget. So this conversation is an example of the types of conversations we have many times a day with teams and companies, conversations about race, leadership, managing styles, mental health, wellness, well-being, sales strategies, et cetera. It really covers a big gamut. And we just really believe that having those, challenging, authentic conversations, again, are more important now more than ever. So enough kind of intro, just really grateful to have all of these amazing speakers here. We're going to quickly do a round robin just to introduce everyone. And for these amazing panelists, please just share your name, who you are, your pronouns. And for the parents on the panel, if you could just share who your children are and one parenting thing that is on your mind the most these days. And for Brittany and Emily, if you want to share something that you feel is on the minds of parents who you work with, that would be awesome too. Anthony, can we kick off with you?
Of course. Thank you so much. And thank you to AllVoices and Electives for having me. Really excited to be on this panel and learn from these amazing co-panelists here. My name is Anthony Onesto. I am the Chief People Officer of a company called Suzy. He, him, his are my pronouns. I have 3 kids. One is just finished freshman year at University of Miami, excuse me. I have a 16-year-old son. That's my daughter, 16-year-old son in high school, and then an 8th grader, a girl going into high school. And COVID has brought me back into my kids' lives, which was really fun. They didn't really want it. They'd rather watch TikTok than spend time with dad, but it's been really incredible getting to know them and spending more time with them. So I'm not sure if I answered the question correctly, but piece of advice, spend more time with your kids, I guess is.
That sounds good.
Great.
Emily, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Emily. I'm SVP of People Operations at Signifyd. We are around 500 people globally. I've been with the company for 5.5 years. I have 2 kids. I have a daughter who's 11 and going into 6th grade, and a son who is 3, almost 4. So big age gap. I think what's top of mind for me right now is very personal, which is, I think, I travel a lot for work. My job is quite demanding, and I think when everything goes according to plan, like I feel like I can manage it. But when it doesn't, that's when I personally feel very overwhelmed and tend to feel like I'm failing at everything. And right now, we're dealing with some behavioral issues with my daughter, and, having to deal with going to specialists and doctors and dealing with her school. And it's been very overwhelming. And I think it's been, but I think it's been humbling because, I am fortunate to have a lot of help and support at home, and had that through COVID. And so, now I feel like a little bit more brought down to the reality of like, how challenging this whole thing is to balance and manage. And so that's kind of where I am today.
Thanks for sharing that, Emily. Q, I'm gonna go to you next.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Q. I'm the Global Head of People Operations at Airbnb, and I've been here for almost 4 years now. So I'm kind of through the hypergrowth and through the tough times, and still trying to kind of stay afloat. In terms of kids, I'm a relatively new dad, so still don't know what I'm doing. My son just turned 1 year old last month. He's still speed crawling. He's not walking yet. So I've been warned about the next adventure that's coming my way. And I think the one thing that comes to mind to me every day is, I know it's very tactical, but it's, am I going to get a call from his daycare that he is going to be home with me and join most of my work meetings or not? And that's more of recent because that happened yesterday. So that's the big thing as I'm trying to figure out parenting. I still don't think I have figured most of it out, and maybe no one does figure it all out is what I'm learning. But learning to go with it, and learning to also realize you cannot plan for everything, which was a big learning for me. So
awesome. And Brittany, go ahead. Thank you, Q.
I'm Brittany Barrett. I am the CRO and co-founder of Kinside, which is a childcare benefit designed to support the modern workforce. And while I don't have children, and it sounds like I'm piggybacking on what Q just said, what I was going to say about my colleagues and about so many of the parents we help find childcare every day is that waiting for the next, like the other shoe to drop is definitely feels like the mindset of so many parents right now who, like they finally find an open spot and then they find out that, somebody in their daycare or preschool has COVID, or they have to reduce the total capacity of their daycare. So it's kind of one thing after another. And I think parents are just hoping that at some point soon, there'll be a little bit more predictability in their lives.
Thank you so much. I'm so tempted to dive in and just ask you all about your kids, but I'm going to pull back. My quick intro, I'm Maggie Goldstein. I'm the VP of Learning Experience at Electives. I have a 4.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. Things that are top of mind, so many things. I'm a solo parent, so navigating that space is complicated, and my oldest daughter is about to start kindergarten. I swore that I wouldn't be one of those parents that gets emotional about that transition. I'm a former teacher, but it has struck me in an unexpectedly heavy way. So I'm very much anticipating that at the end of the summer and a little bit terrified. So transitioning out of the intros, we're kind of eager to start out big picture. And Brittany, I feel like it would be great to start with you just because you are exposed to so many conversations around parents in the workplace through your job, whereas I think many of us avoid those conversations at times. So you talked a little bit about just what you're hearing, but can you tell us about why you and Shadiah, and sorry, we were supposed to have Shadiah on the call. Brittany is swapping in for her just due to some personal changes in schedule. So Brittany, we're so excited to have you. Tell us why you started Kinside, and just what have you seen in terms of patterns, both from parents and also companies who are trying to support parents over the past few months, but even potentially the last, year plus.
Okay, lot of meat in the to that question. So I'll start with why we founded Kinside. So my co-founder Shadiah and I, we've been working together at the last company she founded. It's called Honeybook. And while at Honeybook, she went out on maternity leave. She was really the first person in the business to leave for maternity leave. And, as she was getting ready to come back, she ended up having to delay her return to work and patch together this totally unaffordable childcare solution, because she legitimately could not find an open spot in like the San Francisco, Oakland area. She was looking at both. She was like near the office, near home. So just like calling and calling. And it was just so difficult for her. She was basically like, if I wasn't one of the founders of this company, I'm not sure I would want to return to work. So when it's that difficult and you're going through so much as a new parent, that temptation to just not come back is really strong. So as a founder, she was just really dedicated to finding a childcare benefit that would support, any parents that were coming up after her and keep them engaged in the workforce. So when she went to market to sort of see what was out there, there were a couple legacy options. I won't name names, but they were super expensive, not really built for like a growing young company. Really focused on a single type of parent. So, some of these childcare providers are like $3,000 a month. That's not going to be the right fit for all of your, like everybody in your workforce. Or, they just weren't really helping with like the major issues of affordability. So, seeing the dearth of those options on the market, I think inspired her to start this childcare benefit. And to me, what fascinated me about the problem was just like, why was it so hard, even for you to confirm there was no availability? There should be an inventory management system for the childcare industry. Working parents are the busiest people, like, I don't know, on the planet. So like the fact that, there was no shortcut for finding childcare, just made me want to create kind of a source of truth around that entire industry. And once you actually see the inventory, you have the data to support it, you can solve some of the systemic issues that are causing the problems, like, accessibility, affordability. So that was the real motivation behind founding Kinside. And then as far as the second piece of your question, which is around just like, what are we seeing with parents today? I think parents today, the trends that we're seeing is that like, they're starting to ask for childcare benefits, right? They're after 2 years of a pandemic, they're basically like, I can't do this anymore. There's so many updates, whether it's last minute care, finding full-time care, the cost of care is up 41% over the last 2 years. Availability is way down. 23% inventory decline, just like across the board because of, inability to find actual people that work in those care centers. So they're really, really frustrated, and they're starting to ask for care and ask for help from their employers. There's been a shift from like, I pay for childcare so I can go to work to, I'm paying to go to work by paying for my childcare. So I think there's an ask from a lot of employers increasingly to offer some level of either like financial or tactical support in their childcare that helps them go to work.
That's awesome. Thank you for all of that. And I think that is a perfect segue into what is the title of this panel, which is 5 ways to support working parents. So just for all of you out there, we as panelists have come together to identify what those 5 ways are, both from our personal experiences, the experiences we have in our company, and the research that is out there. And we've narrowed it down to these 5 things. So one is about manager support. The next is about the importance of senior leadership and senior leaders being role models for this type of support and flexibility, flexible work schedules, which I'm really excited to dive into, company benefits, and job design. So starting off with manager support, I would love to, Anthony, start off with you. We talked about this a little bit the other day, but can you just share how you have sort of designed, or how managers are expected to provide support, especially for parents, but for anyone who is in a unique sort of I don't know, working environment or who has unique responsibilities, which I would argue is probably many people. So what do these conversations look like at Suzy, and sort of what's the precedent there?
Sure, appreciate it. And you know, the one thing we really didn't account for was how, you know, we were thinking of the manager and how they were going to support their parents or the parents that work for them, but not thinking of that manager being a parent, right? So and what we found, especially with COVID, and I think this has always been the case if you ask any HR person, the manager or the leader has been the pivotal central point for organizations in terms of engagement. You know, everyone knows the saying, you know, people join companies and leave managers. For us, it became crystal clear that now, with no office and no employees weren't coming into a space where they would see other people and see your brand and be exposed to that, they're really their number one connection to your company was their leader. So for us, we needed to double down on supporting our leaders across the board, just in general. And again, this is none of this is rocket science per se, but we really needed to double down on supporting our managers, giving them the tools. And then in the spirit of, okay, now with this parenting and now you're managing and leading parents and the challenges that they were going through, obviously most impacted at the beginning of COVID, where there was nowhere these kids can go. And I'm blessed. I have teenagers. So I was kidding before, slightly kidding, that they didn't want to hang out with me. But of course it was a blessing for me. But that's one of the things we needed to think about, is like every parent is in a different scenario. And so, you know, childcare for me is not an issue, right? And thank goodness it's not at this point, but other things are happening, right? I'm dealing with what I would argue are more sophisticated and complex things like bullying on social media and other things. And so we're trying to equip managers to basically help them and give them the tools and resources, whether it's something like Kinside that that we would offer, or, you know, care.com or other things, but really trying to educate them on how they can start thinking about supporting the parents within their organizations. Then secondly, we said, okay, by the way, we don't have all the answers. Believe it or not, HR folks do not have although we've been asked so many things and we're like, oh, now we're, you know, safety experts and COVID experts and all this other stuff. Parents have the answers. And so we brought the parents together. Again, none of this is like mind-blowing ideas, but we brought our parents together in a Slack, in Zooms, and we did listening sessions. And a lot of parents were like, oh, I never thought of that. There were questions, I think it was recently, there was talking about walking. Q referred to his kid about you know, being a year and fast crawling, and someone was concerned about their kid not walking. You know, everyone thinks the year time frame is the key. So we're building this community of folks that, okay, we want to just facilitate. We don't have to have all the answers in HR, but facilitate these opportunities for parents to connect. And that was amazing. Like and I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. I wish I had known that 10 years ago or 12 years ago. So I think leaders, key point, giving them the tools, and then of course, bringing the parents together and helping them to help each other.
Cool. And Q or Emily, I would love either of you to jump in and get even a little more granular about what are just some helpful manager strategies or styles or things that I know you both are managers and you're also parents, and I think you have someone who manages you also. So what are some things that you have found that either your manager has done or that you have done for other parents that you support, even just more granularly in the day-to-day, that you think has really made a difference?
I'll start. I mean, I think this is going to sound overly broad and vague, but it all boils down to trust, honestly. And to take it a few steps back, like I think one of the most important things we've done as a company is really try to only hire people that will take kind of an ownership mentality of their own work and that can be trusted to make the right decisions that will benefit, you know, the company's outcomes. And so, you know, that's allowed us to shift away from this focus on like activities and micromanaging people's hours in the day to just saying like, we trust you to do the things that will lead to the outcomes we want. And I don't have to worry if you're not doing like about what your activities are on a day-to-day basis. And so I have that relationship with my boss, the CEO, and I have that relationship with my team too. And the only time that changes is if there's a reason for it to, if there start to be performance issues or that trust starts to erode. But operating from that place is like the most important thing you can do, and giving your people the autonomy to make big decisions about how they do their work in the way that they genuinely believe will influence like sort of the top level company goals, and really just shifting away from these proxy activities that we think are like the indicators of performance, and they're really not. So that to me has been like the most meaningful holistic like thing throughout the company that makes it really sustainable to be a busy parent through this time at our company. Like you need to be able to basically define your own schedule, define your own workflow, the way you work. And then, that's what you're held accountable for is kind of like your results,
Awesome. I think Q, I know I asked Q, do you want to add? You can add to this too.
Yeah, I'm happy to add. I think, plus one to everything Emily said. I think for me, it's also been a little bit more on the tactical level of being very candid and open and keeping those line of communication even more. They're more critical now than they were before when we're not in the office together. And for me, I think it's really been like, yes, focusing on output. And also for me, it's really been like being very vulnerable. Like it's been a really hard time, like, with a young kid. A lot of my direct reports have multiple kids, and really like relating to the fact that I don't know how they even did 2 kids, but like I would love to get advice from them, how they balance their work-life balance, because that's taken a whole new meaning for myself after I've had a kid. And similarly, even managing up, like, if it means a quick Slack message, my son's home today because we got an exposure, and I'll be available asynchronously if anything needs, like just having those quick messages to make sure that we're all human. I am in this new vulnerable state, and sharing that with folks that have done it has really helped me. It's been 2 ways. It's helped me be better at maybe parenting as well as work-life balance, but it's also opened that line of communication so we don't feel like we cannot share those nuggets of information.
Totally. Q, to add on, I feel like the vulnerability is huge. I am someone who has to put like drop off, pick up, soccer practice in the calendar. And everybody sees it. Like they know when I'm dropping my kid off, they know when I'm picking them up. And for a long time, I've felt really guilty about that, because we're a pretty small team. There are some other people on the team who have really small kids, Q, like you, and soccer isn't a thing yet. But we just had someone join who also has older kids. And I looked at his schedule yesterday, and I had this moment of literal glee. Like I was so relieved. I was like, he has soccer too. And like, he has multiple pickups. Like, it's not just me. And it was just this like, aha of, I'm so glad that I've stuck to this kind of vulnerable, scary thing of like sharing my schedule. People know when I'm just like not on. When you're with a 4.5 and 2-year-old, you are not on in any meaningful way. And so it's just, I totally appreciate that, Q. And it gets easier. Like you're in the thick. So
thank you. And I think the only thing I'll add to that, Maggie, it took me a while to, even after I've had these public calendars where I need to do stuff, people still schedule over it. And it took me a while to actually be like, sorry, like I'm not gonna come, because unless it's critical, and then yes, ask my wife to help and we kind of make it work. But it took me a while to say, sorry, like I cannot do this 1 hour in the evening because that's the only hour I get with my son, for example.
Yeah, 100%. Good for you. I think that's a best practice that we can all take away. The art of saying no is a great class we just took at Electives. Okay, so the next topic that we kind of identified as a best practice is just modeling behavior at the executive senior leadership level. And actually, Brittany, Shadiah just shared a little bit about her experience as a founder, and exactly what you talked about, her having to kind of model that the co-founder is going to take maternity leave, and she had to communicate that to investors and the board and be like, I'm actually on maternity leave and this is why. So I would love for Brittany, if you want to jump in too. I think you kind of can speak to this. What is the importance of the highest level leaders in kind of modeling or setting the tone, and what do you see highest level leaders sort of doing that trickles down to affect that supportive culture?
Great. Great question. And I always like to tackle this question from actually an angle of a company that I worked at several years ago, where basically it was same thing. It was a startup, and every night the team would leave at like 8 or 9 p.m. Like that's where we were, and key decisions would get made if you left earlier than that. And when I was working there, I mean, obviously it was incredibly challenging. The hours were insane, but when you build an organization like that, and I saw this, you know, just from our experience there, but you're basically saying that like parents aren't welcome at that organization. And then you're missing out on this knowledge and experience that parents can bring to the table. Like we just didn't have anybody that was, you know, that advanced in their career working to make informed decisions from like that experience. So I really learned in that job, like the value of just having people that can grow with the company, and how, you know, we had sort of very wordlessly fallen in to a company culture that was built around, you know, this very young founder that just felt it was important to be like toiling at 10 p.m. at night. So seeing the impact of that just made me realize like you do have to model it, just like you're saying. And some of the examples you gave are fantastic. So, you know, putting that 4:45 pickup, like childcare exists. Childcare centers, most of them close at 5:30. Your employees do not have the option, 5 o'clock, 5:30. You're like 5:30, which one is that? But yeah, like 5:30. They really close so early. Like this is a necessity. You can't just leave your child there. So like being open about that, saying like Q said that you're going to do that, adding it to your calendar, saying that you're taking the afternoon off in a general channel because you have to tend to a sick child, you know, making that choice to be really transparent around that, and not to police on Slack, you know, to the point that Emily was making. Like, you don't need to see somebody all the time. Like, let that person set a reminder that, or like set their status as, you know, doing something with their children. So, you know, so we've always tried to be transparent around that. If somebody's leaving for a dance recital, Shadiah will be like, I am going to do that. Like, it's not about like hiding it, disappearing for a couple of hours, taking your child to dance practice. So that's huge. Just in demonstrating it. But then of course you have to like put your money where your mouth is too. And, you know, support people with, you know, paternity leave and benefits like that can feel painful when you're implementing them, but ultimately are creating a more equitable environment for your employees, and, you know, doing the hard long-term work of removing some of like the penalties that we feel around parenting for women.
Great. And at Signifyd or Airbnb or Suzy, are there things that you have observed from your senior leaders that have really set the tone or have had to be sort of corrected over time? I was rereading the Airbnb announcement and was pretty inspired by the CEO's words just around flexibility and location. So if you want to jump in, that would be great. But anyone else have things to share about kind of executive leader role modeling?
Yeah, I can just add on that briefly, and then others can chime in. I think it all starts with like leadership behavior, right? Because that could make or break the actions that you want from the words you kind of say you want to do. So in our case, I think flexibility and it's I think the underlining theme below flexibility is trusting your employees, and that's what we led with as well. And I think if you really do that and you show that, and the head of the company comes out and says it sets the tone for others to follow. And that's been really, really instrumental and critical in every big initiative we've done, because it started off with empathy and also trust. And that's actually made folks like my lives a lot easier, because we can then also help people and execute on programs because the tone has been set from an honest perspective. Cool.
Emily, I want to transition to you because I think a lot of people are dying to hear about Signifyd's 4-day work week. So our next big topic was flexible work schedules. So talk to me about that and just sort of the impetus behind it, flexible work schedules more broadly. Give us a little insight into why that decision was made, but also just as a parent, how that's impacted you and other peers that you work with.
Yeah. So about 9 months into the pandemic, I started thinking about this and doing research and looking at some of the pilots and studies that had been done. And it was really a response to this pervasive sense of burnout that was happening at the company. And, you know, there were a lot of like little performative things companies were doing, webinars and stuff, but not that there's anything wrong with the webinar. This is a great webinar. It's a very valuable webinar. But I'm not someone that just wants to sit there and like let something continue. And so I wanted to try to do something bold. And I just kept coming to the conclusion that there was no reason we couldn't be successful doing it too. So really started the conversations with my CEO early last year, early 2021. Yeah. And then in the summer, we ran up sort of a pilot by doing summer Fridays with our R&D org, where we were able to kind of look at some data to just say, hey, what does this look like? What's the impact this is having on sort of like the number of commits that are happening on a daily basis? And there was no effect. So that really helped build like confidence that we could make this work. And of course, the anecdotal feedback was so positive. Like we had an engagement survey after that, and everyone, R&D and otherwise, mentioned like, can we continue summer Fridays? Can we get summer Fridays? So it was clear that people were very, very excited about it. And we had an opportunity to like make a big change here. Then we phased it in doing 2 wellness days a month for Q4. And then we announced that we were going to move to the full permanent 4-day work week at the beginning of this year. It's been amazing. It's gone better than I could have expected. I could sit here and pontificate about all of the reasons that I think it's worked for us and has not worked for other companies. I get reached out to almost every day by random HR leaders who are like, what did you do? Because we tried this and it didn't work. And I can usually predict like some of the things, the pitfalls that they fell into and why it didn't work for them. But again, like this type of thing requires an environment of trust and ownership, like period, end of story. You cannot have an environment of workers who are looking to clock in and clock out and walk away. You have to have people that like care about the big goals for your company, the common objectives, and are willing to be flexible around that. So flexibility around this system was something we emphasized very early on as well, to set expectations. And again, a lot of this is expectation setting. So it's like, look, this is not going to be one size fits all for every team. We're going to have to make this kind of bespoke to make it work for our huge enterprise customers. Like Walmart's not going to just be like, oh, you guys are off on Friday. Okay, bye. Like they still expect it. So how do we continue to meet all of those, SLAs that we've set with these customers, not jeopardize those relationships? It meant it looked a little bit different on different teams, and people knew that going into it. So they were happy with that. For me, I still work on Fridays. I'm usually either traveling or I'm doing deep thinking work that I never have time to do ordinarily. So if the worst case scenario is that it's a forced no meeting day, that's a huge win to me. But by and large, most of our employees are taking full advantage of it. But because there's that trust, because there's that ownership, if something were to come up, they're not going, oh, it's Friday, I don't have to deal with it. They're taking ownership and they're stepping in because they care about the company's broader objectives, and they have that loyalty because we've given them this benefit and they want to pay it back.
I love that. Anthony and Emily, I'm not rushing off from this. I actually think people are going to have a lot more questions about this, and I'm holding back from not diving into more insight around this, but more to come on that. Anthony, you and I have talked a little bit about your flexible schedule personally and sort of how you manage others and the way, like kind of your lens in enabling your direct reports to have flexible schedules. Give us your sort of your view and your values on that. And I would love to hear, again, just for everyone to hear what you personally do in terms of scheduling.
Sure, absolutely. And I think it like you said and Emily said, and everyone really, it's that trust, right? So it's really looking at removing some of the traditional views of productivity, which were, how many in a manufacturing setting or Taylorism, how many widgets you produced. We're beyond that. Now, there are some industries obviously still sitting in that space, but for us, most of us on this call, it's it's knowledge workers, right? And so it's really all about, and I struggle with a little bit with what Q was struggling with, which is I'm in service of the employee. So if I am not around, it was like, oh, I need to answer this, or we need to answer this. We need to get back in a period of time. But most of the work that we're doing, there's a ton of autonomy to basically do it wherever and whenever you want. And And it really helps us to live in that kind of world where we're looking at the output, not necessarily the way you do it. And it's going to be absolutely critical. I'm not plugging my book, but I have a book that just came out, and we talk about Gen Z and how important that flexibility is to the next generation. It's critical, I think, now in organizations, but more so as we think about the next generation of employees that are coming into the workforce. So from my perspective, what I do is I try, I do a couple of things. One is I am not a morning person, terrible in the morning. I'm not bright. I'm not bright to begin with, but really not bright in the morning. And so I leave that time for really just to do really silly tasks. Like, let me just do things I need to check off my list. I love the tools that we have now. We have, Slack and Gmail now have send later functionalities. I do my best work at night. And arguably it's my best work, but I feel like it's my best work. But I do it at night, but I don't expect anyone to respond to me. So I send it tomorrow. I send things, I schedule. It has been a game changer for me, because I think oftentimes it's like you've been for years in the morning, wake up early, go exercise. And if you didn't do that, you were weird and what's wrong with you? And you're never going to be successful. And it's like, we all have these rhythms. We have circadian rhythms where it's like, yeah, we're up and we're down and we're tired. So really trying to figure and allowing employees to figure out how they flow is super important. So there's no schedules. There's no like, hey, 9 to 5. And, I have a contrarian view on the 4-day work week. I think it's just like, if you could do your stuff wherever you want and whenever you want, it could be a 3-day work week. It could be 6 day, whatever it is. Like, people have a way of work that we just allow them to do that. Like, there are people that work on the weekends. There's no one's asking them to do it. That's sort of where they, like Emily said, on Friday with that no work, she's heads down doing valuable work and strategic work, that could be somebody's Saturday. So it's really giving them the autonomy. Where we do fall down a little bit, it's not perfect system, is the junior hires, right? The people coming in that maybe don't know how to manage that stuff, or just find it odd. They entire life have been through school at 8 to 3, college was a little bit more flexible. And it does throw them a little bit off, and we have to provide them a little more guide rails. But yeah, it's more of that trust. Trust is super, super important here, and giving people the autonomy.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And there was a question that came in the chat that I think we should address now, which is just, how can you manage the conflicting idea of allowing parents to have flexibility in their working hours, but also encouraging leadership to keep them included in fast-moving meetings and key decision-making moments, which might be outside of those work hours. So what do you do with that paradigm?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of this, even outside of parents, you think of hybrid, right? A lot of, if there are organizations that aren't fully distributed, the challenge with hybrid is that you're having in-person meetings where you're making these decisions and the person that's remote is not involved, right? So first of all, intention. I talk about intention with leaders a lot. You now have to be intentional about these things. So by the way, that 3 o'clock in the afternoon meeting that you have steadily doesn't work for them. Maybe it shifts. Maybe that 3 o'clock becomes 10 a.m. And again, when you're in a global workforce, a lot of these things kind of just automatically happen because you need to manage a global workforce. But having that meeting, or being intentional and saying, hey, I really know that Q is going to be a component of this decision and impacted, or has really great views on this or experience. Let's wait. Let's bring him in when he's available and be more intentional about it. And it does, but how do you capture that moment, capture the ideas, but bring him in or bring her in, whomever, into that conversation? You have to be more intentional, and it has to be more fluid. Again, I think the problem is we're thinking of these things in traditional sense. Like we originally started having our biweekly all hands at 4 p.m. every Eastern Standard every Wednesday, and we ran into this, and we're like, all right, we're going to have to now put it in the morning and the after. Like, we're going to have to change it up a little bit. Sometimes experience is the best teacher. Like, you're going to get it wrong, but try to be more intentional about thinking through, okay, who's in this meeting, and bring in them. And sometimes it's not, listen, I work for an entrepreneurial CEO. It's just like ideas flow like this. And it's hard to go, wait, hold on, stop what you were saying. And I want to go, let's wait till tomorrow and bring Q in, or picking on Q, but or Emily or someone. It's not always perfect. It's going to be messy.
Awesome. I'll transition to our fourth way to support working parents, which is company benefits. So give us, obviously we've talked a little bit, Brittany, about Kinside, but give us kind of a bigger scope. Like what should companies be thinking about? What are all the different options you've heard that are really helpful, that move the needle? Give us kind of the broad parenting benefit landscape out there.
Happy to do that. Yeah. So I think really anything that helps. I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about kind of like what's happening right now in the world of childcare, and there is just less availability. Like childcare has never been harder to find, and it's never been more expensive. So truly anything that reduces that, financial and tactical burden on parents is going to be a fantastic boon for retention and parental happiness. We also talked about paternity leave. I think modeling and offering parents at our company, we offer 4 months of paternity leave, which is the same that we offer women. And I think for maternity leave, and I do think that's really important. It feels so painful to have, an engineer out for 4 months at a small company, but it is making that first step. And I think there's another option, which is to fund the dependent care FSA, which we really recommend when childcare is this expensive. The dependent care FSA, for anybody who doesn't know this, because I use that term all the time. So I'm like, everybody knows, but not everybody knows what it is. You can set $5,000 aside in pre-tax funds that can be spent on childcare, and funding, and a company can fund that for a parent, and whatever their childcare solution is, whether it's center-based, home-based, a daycare, like a nanny, they can actually use those funds directly to pay for care, which is going to significantly, reduce the pain that they're feeling every single month financially, which tends to be, a lot of what factors into people leaving their jobs. Like when they feel like, hey, it's not even worth it. I'm paying so much in childcare that going to work no longer makes sense. Long-term, it still makes sense. But that loyalty that you're earning from your employees, when you say like, we know that you're a full person who does things outside of work, and that it's expensive to be you, and seeing them and recognizing them goes really, really far. And they can spend those funds on it. So that's a huge one. I mean, if you're bringing people on site, I think obviously like your on site, your center-based care is going to make, the data behind that is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're looking at, 50% women in C-level executive positions over time, 25% because of that more split executive team, 25% revenue increases. For companies that have on-site benefit. If you're doing anything in the world of manufacturing, having backup care options is going to be incredibly important. A near site center where you can do like a quick drop off, those are all going to have like huge outcomes. Not everybody can afford them. And it's definitely not one size fits all in terms of the childcare benefits that are out there. But if you have an organization that, you need somebody to be in work at 5 a.m., there's no childcare at 5 a.m. You have to, you'd work with a company like us or, an individual center to say, can you open earlier? So really understanding what your workforce needs, asking them, and then, working with my company, a childcare consultant, whatever it is, to come up with a really custom plan based on what parents need in your organization. Like there's more out there than you think, is what I would say, that can be customized exactly to what you're looking for.
Cool. And Emily and Anthony added in just in the chat that you can use that FSA for preschool and also camps, at least during
Absolutely.
COVID. So there's a lot of options.
And after school programs.
Yes. And I would just add too, that we see a lot of companies investing in parenting education and discussion groups through electives alone. And as a parent sitting in on those parenting sessions, it's honestly some of the most engaged, animated, like enthusiastic, connected sessions that we have. Like it gives, parents at an organization an opportunity to step out of their role and connect as parents. We all know that like it's so helpful to connect with other parents who have either been through it or who are having similar issues, who can talk to you about sleep training. Q, if you want to connect on that, all game, talk to you about like school issues or, special needs or all of that. And so we at Electives just we have all of these, teachers who speak about raising entrepreneurs or dealing with social media and sexting and porn and crazy stuff that's really uncomfortable to talk about, but is really, really real. So being able to provide those conversations and create space for that dialogue, I think we've at least seen in companies like the parents are the most pumped to show up and talk and engage. So I think that's another benefit that companies can weave in. And then lastly, we talked about job design. So Anthony, I want to kick you off just because you talk about this in your book on Gen Z, but what does it actually mean to collaborate with someone to design their own job? That seems almost euphoric and crazy. But what is that and how does it help parents?
Yeah, it does. It actually does, right? So it's like, we're so rooted in this traditional model of, okay, manager or leader, create a job description, go out into the market, find someone who matches that job description. But oftentimes even that job description on day one is different. Like the manager does a pretty decent job of, figuring out what that job is and what the duties are, but there's always other things involved, right? So imagine a world where we're able to co-create. And that's what's big, particularly in Gen Z, is this idea of co-creation. We see it all the time. This is why you see all these online platforms spending billions of dollars in content, and it's great content. Ozark's fantastic, by the way. But it's like this generation's more interested in that TikTok, right? That 8-second sort of flip up of other people creating content. And it's actually thrown this whole industry into like, how do we do this and how do we manage? But outside of that, it's really thinking about job design and what is needed. Like if this is a knowledge job, can it be done anywhere and anytime, right? We're traditionally, like, if you think about the construct of every company right now, 9 to 5, it's just everything is made up, right? Everything we do is made up. Why is that the case? Like, is this job really need? Now there are clients, like Emily said, Walmart. We deal with a lot of enterprise clients that have been built in this construct, and we're forced to work within it. But there might be some roles that aren't, right? That aren't client facing or customer facing. Why not having that AI engineer or the Python engineer working whenever she wants on the weekends, so it's really figuring out, and it's a different approach to the actual job. It's not just sort of, again, this linear thinking of, okay, here's the job and these are the duties and it's 9 to 5. It's like rethinking, okay, what is it? And working with the individual to say, okay, what works for you? And especially with parents, like maybe it's okay someone going to pick up. Everyone was worried about 3:45 pickup or 4:30 or early in the morning drop off or things like that. It's like, can this job work outside of that normal construct? And I think we're going to start seeing a trend of that happening more and more. Again, less for the more customer facing retail and other industries. But I think for more knowledge jobs that don't have that customer facing, it's an opportunity to rethink, oh, okay, maybe this job actually it's not 9 to 5. It's when, it's 10 to 3. And then, maybe a Saturday here or there or a Sunday. Again, we're not asking folks to work on the weekend, but again, I know most folks are off on the weekend, but maybe it's a Monday or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely rethinking the whole thing. And I say it with ease and I write about it with ease, but it's going to be a hard thing to really do. So take steps on how to, not the entire job, but maybe pieces of the job that can be redesigned or co-designed.
Hugh, does that job design exist at Airbnb, or have you seen that at all?
I think very informally, right? So I think, when you work in a hypergrowth and, you work in a company that's evolving and changing, I think it's more opportunity based. So you find you craft a role based on the need and the point in time, but it's definitely not, as Anthony is mentioning, like, it's not necessarily proactive because it's not the muscle memory we've been programmed to do. But I think we do it pretty well on a reactive basis, which is also a start because that's not always the norm. But I think that's how it's evolved over time. And I think the type of company, the growth stage it's in, also lends itself to doing it probably a little bit more easier than a relatively more stable state Walmart, for example, in that case.
Totally. Just being mindful of time, we have a couple of questions that have been submitted, and to everyone who's listening, now is an awesome time to submit any questions you have based on what we've covered. So there are a few, I'll knock the first one out right now. I think most of us touched on this, but how do you create a culture of transparency, of sharing schedules, and even just expanding this question a little bit to that culture of trust or vulnerability that enables people to have flexible, supportive work-life balance?
I can jump in. I think you just do it and it follows. Like when I've had really bad days, like with no sleep and my son was all over the place, like I showed up in a horrible state, like in a exhausted state, and I didn't try to mask it, and I talked through it. And you just do it, and then I think you realize that the rest of the team feels it's okay. Same with the calendars. Like some may not be comfortable sharing their entire calendar. I can't due to the nature of my job. Like a lot of us in HR may have sensitive meetings, but you can still share select meetings and make them public, like pick up for childcare. So I think you find what works for you, and I think if you do it and just show how you're not superhuman and it can take you down too, I think it opens up the door for it to organically feel like it's okay to do it for the rest. But that's been my kind of experience.
Yeah, I would love to jump in there and add to Q's comment. Earlier we talked about how it starts with leadership. So it's definitely like leadership modeling, but then leadership asking, managers to do the same, like actually being like, let's make this a practice among teams because people are trusting of their direct manager. So in a larger company, kind of going from there, the manager does the same thing to their employees. So just having that kind of waterfall of communication between teams can be really, really helpful in creating that transparency. And also when you're in a one-on-one as a manager, like actually just asking your employees, like, are you okay? Are there challenges that you're facing that you think like adjustments could be made that we could help to solve? And using that, listening tool to craft and like not only listening, but also being willing to like share your own experiences with your team members in those moments will start creating that transparency all the way through.
Awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing to add here, sorry to interrupt, but it's also, and folks talked about it before, it's role modeling at the top. I think whatever we do, if the CEO is not doing what we're doing or the senior executives, then it's all for naught. And I often, even before COVID, I would coach CEOs in terms of when they walk into an office, like everyone's staring at you. You're the CEO. So you are literally like everyone will perceive you as, so if you're like not happy or you're, you don't say hi to, like they literally take it personally. And so you have to manage, like, I'm not saying be inauthentic and happy and smiley, but know that every action you take, people are watching and they're taking their cues from you. And that really was a thing for our CEO, who was very private, that didn't want, he had a baby, and he didn't want to announce it. I'm like, no, like we have to be like you're going out and you're going to take some time off. And it's like, so it's hard, especially when you're dealing with young, not necessarily a young company, but a growing, fast moving company with a CEO that may have more of a traditional point of view on these things. I think it's absolutely critical at the top.
So this question has been on my mind, and there are a couple of people who have alluded to this in different ways, which is sort of the kind of equity behind this idea of flexible working schedules. So what do you do when you have companies that have customer facing or retail roles that are not flexible versus like the knowledge roles that are? How do you like that? It creates a huge pause for me. Like, how do you actually navigate that when only some people have the privilege of being able to engage in that design or flexibility?
I would love to take a crack at it, just because that is the breakdown of Kinside's employee base as well. We have a full team of concierge, and they need to be, on to work with all of our, working parents that are coming in throughout the day, on the weekends. And ultimately it's about, building like monitoring it and building a team. When you are designing those things, it's like, there's not one person doing that job, right? So you work, with each person, and it's like building a regular like retail schedule in the way that you do it in a store. It's like, these are the hours I'm available, and you kind of it's a lot of work, right? But it's about patching together something that creates full coverage for those employees. And not everybody will get everything, but it's like, if your support is maybe like an entry level role and you want that person to grow in your organization, then having even more autonomy as they grow and maybe become a knowledge worker later is like a real motivator for a lot of those employees. So I think, you can earn the fairness over time too. So that's one approach, but I'm sure that everybody here has a lot of insight that they can add.
I mean, I do think it is always valuable to zoom out and look at what are the big picture goals you're trying to accomplish. You know, you may be looking at exclusively metrics like how quickly support tickets are responded to, but maybe there's also a way to rethink your support model and create more of like a, you know, self-service kind of database that customers can learn to answer some of the questions that come up again and again and again to try to reduce support volume overall and allow these support people, these warm human bodies with brains, to actually focus on maybe more meaningful support tasks. So I'm not saying this is always the case. Like we do not have, you know, like Anthony, we don't have anyone producing physical goods, and like there's often not a lot of corners you can cut there. But when it's anything that revolves around like brain power and like human effort and energy, like there may be ways you can get smarter and really hone in on the value that you're trying to provide, to sort of create a little bit more, I don't know, flexibility or equitability there. But it is tough. I mean, you know, I think what we stress overall is like we do care about outcomes, you know, and so there are certain jobs that are going to be more time sensitive, and that's not going to be something we're going to be able to like fully escape from.
Awesome.
I was just going to add that I love her perspective on that. And one of the things that you were saying earlier about your 4-day work week is like finding those data points that you need to track to be like, is this or isn't that, is this or is this not working? And I think that's so hard for so many team members. And I know I would like, as I'm sure many people on this call, to be like, what are the data points that we should all be measuring to ask ourselves, is this working?
Right.
How do we approach creating those points for ourselves? Even like a framework is something I think we all need and could benefit from.
Well, I know we're at time. I will just say, I would not encourage companies to get really granular with the data that they're tracking. At the end of the day, we committed to only tracking our company KPIs and metrics that we've always tracked. And that's what we're worried about. And if you start focusing on these littler metrics here and there, like you kind of miss the point. And so I get that question probably more than any other question when it comes to the 4-day work week. How did you measure it to make sure it was going to be successful? And it's like, I mean, some of it is belief and faith that like, you know, that like this law of diminishing returns on people's, you know, brain power and time and the studies out there, but you can't get really focused on activities and like, you know, productivity metrics. It will not tell the right story. You'll lose the point.
Yep. Awesome. There's so much more to cover. This was really helpful, even just for me to engage in this conversation. I think it's therapeutic to take a step back and think about how we support anyone, and especially for all of us parents in the workplace. This is a really intense time, I think, for tech companies, for any human being on this planet. There's obviously a lot going on. Just for anyone listening, I hope this is kind of a reminder and opportunity to remember to trust and build relationships with the people you manage and the people who manage you. And, you know, in think about bigger ways that we can support each other. So whether that's through coming to things like this, or learning experiences through electives, or benefits through Kinside, or even just direct connection. We hope that we can continue the conversation, and hope to hear from all of you in some follow-up connections. So Q, Brittany, Emily, and Anthony, thank you so much for joining us, and Christina behind the scenes for helping to facilitate and put this on.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Happy almost Friday.